So this is part 6 of our Yelp clone series. We left off, we have our map working, and if you drag it around like this, we can, we're basically logging the coordinates of the screen. And if you remember at the end of the last video, what we did was, let me pull up my account. I'll look in a second, but basically we seeded a database with about 2,500 locations, restaurant locations in New York City, and we have a Mongo database on MLab seeded, and now we want to basically, depending on where we drag, query for those restaurants. So what we're going to do is first that querying that's going to take place has to take place on our Express server right here. So we need to have some way to communicate with it. So for this video, what we're going to do is set up a way to send post requests and get requests to our server here. And what we want to do is pass along coordinates that we want to use for our query. So what we're going to do is use fetch. So if we go to our map.js, I'm just going to make a local function called send coordinates. Or really, we're not really sending anything. It's going to be, those are going to be like our query parameters. We're going to be saying get restaurants, and what we're going to do is pass those coordinates. So I'm going to say fetch dot. I forget this every time because I had been using Super Agent Axios. Okay, so we fetch our URL. Okay. So this right here, this URL, we don't want to hard code this. We want to put this in a config file because we're going to have a development and production server. We might need to change them back and forth. So come up here and say import config from // go back 2 directories to config, and let's go to our config file, which doesn't exist yet, so create one. And we're just going to say export, and so we're going to have stuff like this, like URLs, some styles, those kind of things. So we're going to have images. But for now, we just basically want some common place for these like string assets, so that if we need to change something, they're all in one place. But for now, let's just start with our URLs, and I'm going to say, I'll call this staging. Export, maybe it's export default. There we go. Okay, and come back to our map. We can now reference that. I'm just going to actually call this URL, because then we're going to have to change it anyway. So I think what we'll do is this. And leave a note that it's staging. And then when we have our production one, we can just toggle them back and forth with like a comment. Kind of a quick and dirty way to get that done. So config.url, and we need to find the we need to create like a path that we need to hit in our app. I'm gonna use the backticks here, but it's gonna be API. Sorry. API slash. I'll call it. We'll try to be kind of restful, so I'm just gonna call it slash restaurants. And that being said, we need to jump over back to our API. And if you go to, sorry, our Express app, if you go to our API.js routes file, you'll see here that right now we're taking any resource. And so we already have a route set up. So I'm just going to say console.log rec.params. And I also want to log our query. And I have some other server running that's throwing this off, so you'll have to forgive me. Well, I'll pause when we get to that point. But basically, we just want to log our params and our query to see if anything comes through. So let's try to see if we hit this endpoint. So I'm going to pause real quick and fix that issue with my my server. So I had another app running somewhere. It just kind of froze up my nodemon. So give me 1 second. All right, so I got my dev server running, and all we want to do is just see if we can log one request, right? Make sure our request is working. So you go back to your app. Right now, I have this get restaurants, and we're trying to hit that endpoint, but we're not calling this anywhere. So when do you think the best time to call this is? It's going to be when we drag, right? So like after we drag this map to like here, we want to then fetch. So right now we have a function called, or we're just calling this inline. So there's a callback on the map view on region change complete, and we're just kind of setting the state here. So instead of that, we're going to call our function. We're going to say this dot get restaurants, and we'll pass in the region. And just to make sure it's still working, let's just log this console.log region. So we got that right there on line 33. Let's go check line 33. Okay, so our new function is working. And actually, that should have sent a request to our server. So let's just flip over to our server. And I don't see anything. So network request failed. Oh, let's go over to our index. HTTPS. All right, so you'll see here that that's going through, and so here we have rec.params is just resource restaurants, and then our query is null. So we need to create a query, and this is what I always complain about with fetch. They don't, and again, unless it's changed, they don't provide a utility for creating a query string. So we need to create our own query strings, which is I find annoying. So let's go to npm. Especially now we're going to be working with like some JSON or something. It's not going to be like an easy passing, search for cat. Like these are going to be complicated structures. So query parse, and I think this is probably what I used last time. Okay, so we can say query string dot stringify. So let's install this query string. Oops, sorry. This is in our app. We need to install it. All right, and let's go to our map.js, and over here is where we're going to turn this to a query string, and we're going to append it right at the end there. So we're going to have to require it. Import query. And let me just check if it's okay. And then for right now, I'm just going to log, see if I can log this query string, see what it looks like so we know what we're working with. And again, it's just query string dot stringify. So let's just try that. I'm going to refresh this. And let me get this slightly larger so we can actually see what we're working with. Okay, so you'll see here now we have this in a query string. And this actually wasn't that bad, so maybe I overreacted. But still, we don't want to be creating that on our own. It's not really that sustainable. So we have that. So we're just going to append that to the end here. So let's just say const query equals query string dot stringify region, and then in here we're just going to insert that again using the ES6 backticks string interpolation. It's much easier than having to keep adding stuff, so I'm a big fan. And we'll just stick that in there. And now we want to see if on the back end we get that query, and we want to see if it's like clean, like well, you'll see what I mean in a second. So let's refresh. And I'm going to pull open my other tab right here. And look, see? So look, right here's our query string. So it's nice, clean latitude, latitude delta, longitude, and longitude delta, which is exactly what we want. So now we can take that information, and in our next video, we'll actually use that to query the database.